Good afternoon. I'm Charles Van Doren, and this is NBC Kaleidoscope, the second program of the new series. I think I can introduce it best this way. Edward R. Murrow is a man we respect highly over here, although we don't usually shout his name up and down the network. I mention him today because he made an important speech a month ago, offering some pungent views on what was wrong with television. One of the things he said was that instead of showing so many Hollywood Indians, television should go after real Indians and talk about what's happening to them up and down the major Indian reservations for half a year in pursuit of his story. Bob's been a reporter for 28 years, as well as a magazine writer, war correspondent, editor of both broadcast and written news. He thinks this is one of his better stories, and so do we.
This is Indian country, Hart Butte, Montana, on the Blackfeet Reservation, 28 miles south of Browning, Montana, right on the eastern edge of the magnificent mountains of Glacier National Park. The Viel family lives here, Richard and Stella Viel, and 9 children. Richard was away at the moment hunting elk. The meat is dried for winter use. Mr. Viel can't work much because of a crippled leg mashed when a horse stepped on it. But the family is fortunate. It gets a pension of $265 a month, about $5.50 a week for each person. Slightly better off than most of the remnants of the Indian tribe, once famed and feared for its fighting ability and arrogance. These are average Blackfeet Indian homes in suburban Hart Butte. The Viel's neighbor to the south isn't quite so well-heeled. He, too, was gone fishing, not for fun, but for dinner.
Good morning. Watch out for the how's the twins today? When's your mother coming home? Saturday? Good. Watch out for the cord for this. Here, girls. Wilma, do you want to put the doll on the table? Huh? Good. All right, children. Shall we all turn left and say the pledge? Let's place our right hand. The other one, Patricia. That's very good, Wilma. That's good. No, the other one, Rosemary. Oh, we'll say the pledge now. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ever since the white man came to this country, and incidentally we now call him the non-Indian, but ever since the non-Indian came to this country, he's been trying to shove the Indian out of the way. The Indian has had something he wants, and history says he usually gets it. For years it was done simply by violence, then as we ourselves became more civilized, by trickery, now by inaction, by bureaucratic regulation, and by act of Congress. House Concurrent Resolution 108 says it was the opinion of Congress that various Indian tribal lands should be quickly terminated. Terminated means that our pious treaties with the Indians, guaranteeing them land on which to live as long as the grasses grow and the waters flow, should be summarily junked. The land itself, now held in federal trust for the Indians, would be removed from trust and made subject to taxes. Since in most cases the Indians have been carefully ground down to near bankruptcy, they can't pay the taxes. The land then must be sold, usually within a specified time. Other less obvious methods are also used. It's an intricate business involving timber and water resources, great stores of oil and minerals and unspoiled grazing and farmlands worth an incalculable amount of money, perhaps several billions of dollars. And it is these resources that make the Indian land so desirable to the non-Indian. As the country grows and our resources diminish, they become more desirable, and even as they become more important to all the American people. A separate termination act must be passed by Congress for each reservation. One such law, now on the books, affects more than $30 million worth of timber, much of it hardwood, much of it virgin forest, owned by the Menominee Indians in central Wisconsin. Beginning in the middle of the last century, the white man has wanted this forest so badly that he's tried to steal it, he's committed mass murder, he has persecuted, brutalized, and debauched the Indians as well as the forest. The so-called Pine Ring helped finance powerful lobbies that worked successfully on Congress and on the Indian Bureau. But the Indians held on here until old Bob La Follette rescued them. And in 1929, La Follette exposed the whole sordid, shameful story of the Menominee Forest in a Senate investigation. After years of litigation and suffering, the Menominees in 1951 were awarded $8.5 million for the damage done their forests by federal mismanagement. The money was put in trust, couldn't be touched without congressional approval. This is important because when the Menominee Indians wanted that money, they were told bluntly that Congress would let them have it only if they agreed to termination. There is nothing in the available records to indicate that the Interior Department or its Indian Bureau did anything to discourage this idea that if the Indians were to get the money awarded them by the courts, they must in return surrender their only capital asset, the tax-free status of their forest, which was guaranteed by the most solemn promise this government can give, a treaty. The Interior Department went even farther. It reversed long-established bookkeeping procedures to require additional distribution of tribal funds, revenue from this sawmill and lumber yard, distribution to the members of the tribe. The result was quite predictable. The tribal treasury shrank from something like $12 million almost to nothing. Then the termination bill graciously provided that the tribe could take over the forest and run it as a private corporation if it could get the necessary financing. If it couldn't, the land would be sold. The funny part of it is these competent Menominees may be able to take over their own land. The white man, the non-Indian, may again be frustrated. The Menominee Reservation, in addition to timber, has recreational possibilities described by the Wisconsin Conservation Department as an uncut diamond potentially of tremendous value. Under tentative plans, this lush reservation would be made a separate county. Wisconsin found that the lure of additional revenue from taxes on the land was overrated. Assuming the job of maintaining law and order and the educational system, which is good, and other services would cost a great deal, and surrounding counties and the state itself might lose rather than gain from termination. A disillusionment experienced also in other areas where termination has been represented as a great blessing not only for the Indians but for all the people. Some would profit handsomely, but many more Americans, including the Indians, would lose everything from their self-respect to critical reservoirs of swiftly disappearing natural resources. These children and their children would lose their heritage. In Helena, the capital of Montana, on the main drag, Last Chance Gulch, is the home office of Representative Lee Metcalf, a Democrat, a student of Indian affairs.
Well, the current Indian policies of the Bureau of Indian Affairs are calculated to sandbag the Indians into selling their land and their other resources. Whether these are intentional or inadvertent, they're working for the benefit of outside pressures to force the Indians to get rid of their resources, such as mineral resources, timber resources, and all these other land values that are so important on the Indian reservations.
What happens to the Indians when they lose their lands and their assets?
When the Indians lose these things, they lose their tribal identity, which is very important, and then they go on relief or welfare. They lose their tribal source of income, and they become a burden on the state. And people have never thought about what the impact is upon the state welfare system, upon our old age assistance, upon our Social Security, the impact upon law and order, and upon areas in and around the communities of Montana.
And the state then wouldn't profit at all?
The state would have a great loss as far as the taxpayer is concerned.
What pressures on the Indians have you felt or seen?
Outside of the more obvious pressures, that is of the power company to gain control of the dam site or grazing operators to get key strips or water holes, there are some pressures from inside the Bureau. For example, the Indian tribes that are reluctant to provide for a termination plan don't get credit from the Bureau, or the Bureau will not release funds to the tribes. Now, they have a loan program for loaning those tribal funds to Indians to build up their herds or to build their homes, and the Bureau will withhold the tribe's own funds and their own credit facilities, or surround them by so much red tape that you can't get a loan in time. For instance, there was a complete failure of law and order in the Omaha reservation because the Bureau cut back the services of enforcement of law and order until the Omaha tribe consented to a revision of their land policy and began working on a termination plan. They had a land sale on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, and the Northern Cheyenne tribe down in southern Montana sold their herd, their Hereford herd, in order to get money to buy key water holes and key strips. And the Bureau refused to release that money. So the land sale was held. The local grazing operators who wanted to get a hold of those key strips bought them, and much of the Northern Cheyenne tribal grazing land is thereby rendered valueless.
How exactly does termination work?
Well, termination is in effect a forced sale. For example, suppose they terminate the Flathead tribe. That, in effect, would force them, under the present tax laws and the present constitutional provisions and the present statutes of Montana, to sell that dam site to the Montana Power Company. A forced sale with one buyer is obviously unfair. In other areas, it forces the tribes to sell the timber to perhaps one operator, or to destroy a sustained yield program. Termination means that you turn the tribal assets over to the state for taxation, and the Indians obviously cannot afford to assume that burden all at once. And that means that they have to sell all those assets, sell them at a bankrupt sale, an auction, to sometimes only one bidder. And obviously that means that the Indians are going to suffer, whether it's a dam site, a timber holding, a resort area, grazing land, or whatever it is. It allows the non-Indian owners to exploit that resource.
One termination effort that failed took in the Flathead Indians in Metcalfe's district, south of Glacier National Park, snuggled under the Mission Range, mountains that in real life put to shame their own postcard pictures, and a haven, incidentally, for the ferocious but now rare grizzly bear. Just outside the reservation is Hungry Horse Dam, part of a power development system that reaches all around Flathead Lake, one of the largest freshwater lakes in the country. The Flatheads got this land the hard way. They were given it as their permanent refuge after they were driven out of Montana's fertile Bitterroot Valley. Timber on the reservation has been estimated to be worth $40 million, power sites $30 million, a total of $70 million. The figures are little more than guesses. Actual value may be much more, it may be a little less. The Flathead tribe owns and leases to a member of the tribe a resort, the Blue Bay Lodge. The Flatheads are an advanced tribe, the people well-educated, shrewd in business. They also own and operate a bathhouse at Camas Hot Springs, deep in the heart of the reservation. Modern and clean, they just raised the rates to $1.50 a bath. Also within the reservation is the town of Polson, but it's not an Indian town. Once, all of this land was owned by the Flatheads, but it was allotted land owned by individual Indians, not by the tribe. And piece by piece, as the individual owners became hard up, they sold their lakeside holdings. And the Indians have also lost the same way most of the better farmland. There's quite a business in land around the Flathead Lake now that the Indians no longer own it. The tribe has been buying back what it could of the farmland, but when it does, the land remains taxable. Once it's taken out of trust, it stays out of trust. And this is one of the other ways termination is accomplished, in little chunks. It's slower than mass termination, but just as effective. If the Flathead termination bill had gone through, one of the prizes would have been Kerr Dam, the only one of the 4 potential dam sites on the reservation that has actually been developed. Montana Power leases the site from the Flatheads. Montana Power and the tribe got along together remarkably well. But at hearings on the termination bill, it was brought out that the tribe would almost certainly have had to sell the tribal land. It's highly unlikely that anyone but Montana Power could use Kerr Dam. And since the sale would have been obligatory by a specified date, it would have been the equivalent of a forced sale, as Metcalf pointed out, with only one logical and serious bidder. Somehow, even developments that superficially would seem beneficial have a way of going sour for the Indians. An irrigation system on the reservation uses water from Indian land. It irrigates about 163,000 acres of land, but only 1/10 of this is owned by the Indians. And what irritates the Flathead leaders even more is the fact that Montana Power sells electricity to the irrigation system, which then sells it to the Indians, electricity developed from their own water. In addition to their regular lumbering operations, the Flatheads have an unusual business, the cutting and selling of Christmas trees. From this and from the dam site lease and from lumbering and the bathhouse and the lodge, the tribe collectively and its individual members are doing far better than most. So the tribe was shocked by termination proceedings 4 years ago. The termination bill died in committee, yet Indian Bureau officials haven't given up. The Bureau Area Director has frequently reminded the Flatheads that they must someday expect termination, that they must begin preparations now. As a matter of plain fact, the pressures on all Indians to accept termination are pervasive. They aren't always specific, but they're there. Sometimes expressed by the attitudes of Indian Bureau officials, sometimes by propaganda, sometimes by downright threats. And sometimes the Indians are afraid to fight back. In the tiny and old town of St. Ignatius, north of Missoula, in the southern end of the Flathead Reservation, is a most remarkable man, a Jesuit priest, Father C.E. Byrne. For almost 20 years, Father Byrne has worked with American Indians, first with the Coeur d'Alene, now with the Flatheads. His office is one of a very few in a building put up in 1890 and scarcely touched since, except for the addition of a minimum of electrical wiring.
I believe the government has committed itself to the development of the Indians, and that does not have within its proper scope a termination. I don't think that has anything to do with the government's obligation. And if they accept that as the purpose, then they are not only not living up to their word, but they're defeating the very purpose for which they called the Indians together in 1934 and told them that they could develop their own lives in their own way under the law as the government would permit it in the counties and the states. So if the government then holds termination as their goal, then they're defeating that development of the Indians, and they're defeating their own purpose, because their purpose is to develop the Indians. And there isn't one tribe that is more fearful of termination than of any possible help they might get from the government. And what is holding them back is the fear that their development will end in their own liquidation. And consequently, the government will not develop the Indians. And they won't help in that development unless the government completely forgets all about termination. And if there is to be termination, the Indians are the ones to decide, we want to terminate from the government. But the government should never say, we're going to terminate from you.
Let's sing a song about the three little ducks. All right, shall we get ready? How many little ducks now? 3. All right, children, let's start. 3 little ducks that I once knew, big ones, little ones, there were.
Each Indian reservation is different and has different problems. And less than 200 miles from the Flatheads, we find the Blackfeet. There's been no congressional move toward terminating the Blackfeet, but a steady squeeze of economic pressures is having the same effect. The Blackfeet are desperately poor and getting poorer. The Indian Bureau has not as yet seen fit to do more than ask that the tribe audit its books. No audit will alter the fact that for many children in the Hart Butte School, the hot lunches they get are often their only meals. Nor will an audit supply them with shoes and warm clothing for the bitter Montana winter that's just about upon them. Teachers at the school will tell you that they dread the days the children can't get to classes, not because of the education they miss, but because of that one hot, nourishing meal. The non-Indian school principal says the children are bright as any he's worked with. They're responsive and cooperative and eager. It's just that sometimes they're cold and hungry. It goes without saying that much of the Blackfeet land is rich for farming and for grazing, and some Blackfeet Indians are rich. The tribe's previous history shows signs of some bad administration by tribal leaders, some of it due perhaps to incompetence, some to questionable procedures established by the tribe's constitution, some, no doubt, due to downright graft. But these things couldn't be of more than incidental importance to the fact that I could find no sign whatever that the federal government is doing anything to help. A desperate request for $50,000 relief assistance last spring ran into a mass of Indian Bureau gobbledygook and disappeared from sight. Then came the polio epidemic early in the summer. It was one of the worst in the country. Most of the children with paralytic polio wound up in the gentle hands of the sisters at Columbus Hospital in Great Falls, Montana, and into the equally gentle and skilled hands of Joseph Luckman, a dedicated physical therapist. Mr. Luckman, how many of these polio patients do you have, the children?
At the present time, we have 5.
How many have you had altogether? Do you know? Do you remember?
We've sent approximately 11 back up to Browning.
What is the state of their general health when you get them?
I would say generally it's below average.
In what respect?
In both nutrition and, well, nutrition mainly, perhaps hygiene.
What's the effect of that so far as your work is concerned?
Well, in many cases, it doesn't affect the polio too much, but in some cases they're so severe that perhaps the polio would have ended up being much less crippling.
Is it acute malnutrition enough to hold up your therapy?
Well, out of the 17 patients that we've had, only 2 was severe enough to hold it up. But it was very severe, and actually, person wonders which has the most severe effect on the child, the malnutrition or the polio.
What happens to the children when they go back to the reservation?
They're sent back to their homes with instructions given to the parents as to the exercises to be given and how many times, so on, the general care for the child.
How long do you usually keep the children here?
Actually, this depends upon the extent of their paralysis, and in many cases, it varies from 10 to 15 days to perhaps, in these children, it'll probably be 2-3 months, probably 4, probably more.
Well, on the whole, they seem remarkably well behaved. They don't cry much, do they?
Very fine children. Good feeling. Very spoiled.
Not public funds, but money from the Infantile Paralysis Foundation helps the hospital pay for treating these children. The hospital records show other cases not involving polio, instances in which the children are too weak from malnutrition to cry. One child who had a red blood measurement, a hemoglobin, of 3 on a scale of 14. Others who weighed less than half of what is considered normal. And like a non-Indian child, an Indian baby with a paralyzed left leg can't wiggle his left toes. Just outside Great Falls is a monumental example of what happens to Indians deprived of their lands. Hill 57, named from the maps used by Army Air Force pilots when they made a brief and spectacularly unsuccessful effort to carry the mails. The citizens of Hill 57 share a common water pump for which each family pays $1 a month. They are called landless Indians. Obviously, they once had land. They lost it at different points in modern Indian history for a variety of reasons. They come from different tribes, from different places. They have, however, 2 things in common. They have no real homes, and they exist, but no more. There are many other communities like Hill 57 scattered around the West. And this is what I kept thinking of as I read speeches about giving the Indians their freedom, giving them the right to sell their lands, and as I listened to the philosophic dissertations of Glenn Emmons, the former banker at Gallup, New Mexico, now head of the Indian Bureau. All this less than 200 miles from Glacier National Park, once part of the Blackfeet Reservation, but long ago given to the United States. The Blackfeet area includes some of the West's choicest grazing land. Cattle right off the range are prime beef. But here, too, we find the problem of key tracts. A key tract or key strip is a piece of land holding the water supply for surrounding tracts or controlling the access to surrounding land. The loss of a key tract can destroy the value of thousands of additional acres. And among the vast areas the Blackfeet have been forced to sell, according to tribal leaders, there are numerous key tracts. But the Blackfeet ranchers and farmers have other problems, all contributing to the strapped economy and to the forced sales of land by individual Indians. Meade Swingley, who attended Gonzaga University in Spokane on a scholarship, was employed in the Air Force during the war and by the State Highway Commission for 4 years before he went to work for the tribe. Meade Swingley has made a study of such things as the irrigation system on the reservation.
The Indian has to pay for his own water that he doesn't use. An individual Indian that owns the land has to pay $1.80 a year to the government, to the Reclamation Service.
Well, the farmer has to pay $1.80 an acre for this water, whether he uses it or not, or whether he wants it or not.
Yes.
What happens if he doesn't pay it?
Then it becomes a first lien against the land.
What is the normal lease price for farm land?
The average leasing price of irrigated land is $4 an acre.
That would increase, then, in effect, it would increase the lease price of the land by about 50% to a farmer.
That's right. Yes, it would.
Does that cut down the number of people who want to lease it?
It restricts the leasing of irrigated land to those farmers that can afford to pay for water.
What's the best crop for this sort of land?
The major crop on the reservation is wheat. However, if an Indian farmer wants to farm his own land, it's almost impossible for him to do it because he doesn't have any wheat acreage allotment. He has to grow lesser crops such as barley and oats.
Have you had any experiences along this line?
Yes, I have. I wanted to farm my land, and the department told me that it wasn't farmland, that they had checked the land and found that it was only grazing land because of its elevation. And they said, however, if I did want to farm it, that I could farm it if I would get a patent for it. And a patent, by a patent I mean that you apply to the government for lifting of all government restrictions, and it then becomes taxable property, and you can do with it, do anything with it that you want to.
Did you do that?
Yes, I did, and I have been farming it successfully and been raising very fine crops there.
When on the land that they decided was not farmland?
That's right, and it's happened in several instances here on the reservation.
But now your land is taxable?
Yes, it is.
But anyhow, Swingley can now farm his land. He also pays taxes on it. His land has, in a real sense, been terminated. Meanwhile, the Indians ship their cattle. A few are big operators, but the majority have perhaps 2 or half a dozen or a dozen. To get the best possible prices, they pool their cattle, selling in large quantities to the bigger buyers. But each cattle grower gets paid only for the poundage he contributes to the pool. The Blackfeet Reservation is a peninsula jutting up into a sea of oil. It's surrounded on 3 sides by extremely productive oil and gas fields. There are some wells on Blackfeet land, some 384 in production, but in some places the difference in activity between Indian and non-Indian land is unbelievably obvious. On one side of the line, wells as far as you can see, on the other, none. Strange things happen in Blackfeet drilling. One well is supposed to have produced more than 6 million cubic feet of gas in 4 days and 40 barrels of high-gravity oil. But it was shut down and capped. The explanation given the Indians was simply that it had lost production. Ilef McKay, the tribal secretary, told me more of the story.
The oil field is over here. In behind us is land that belongs to Blackfeet. That's the Blackfeet Reservation. We also have an oil field up across the Canadian line. We have one of the largest oil fields in the world. That's the Pincher Creek field. I understand there recently they hit one of the largest natural gas wells that they've ever hit on this continent in North America. We have oil fields over on that end, on the south end, and we're right in the middle. The reservation is right in the middle. We don't have too much oil development on the reservation right now.
If you're surrounded on three sides by oil land, why isn't there more oil development in the reservation?
Well, Indian land, as you know, is held by the United States government for the Indian owner. And the land has to be leased according to rules laid down by the United States Department of Interior. And I believe that actually discourage an oil operator from coming on the reservation to lease land for oil development. And as a result, after the Indian owner holds the land so long and isn't able to get any income from it, then in order to make a living or in order to live, he has to dispose of the land, and then he attempts to live on the income that he receives from sale of the land as long as he can.
Then if there is oil development of the land, it doesn't do the Indian owner any good because it's not his land any longer.
Oh, no. It won't be his land. It goes out of Indian ownership usually when it's sold.
Yeah. All this adds up to a tribe that is broke, but that has been obliged to handle its own relief burden and simply hasn't got the money. The tribal council, with Chairman Walter Wetzel, was given the bare facts.
Meeting will come to order. This is a duly called meeting of the Blackfeet Tribal Council. The Blackfeet Tribal Council is faced with a very serious problem. We are faced with the problem of taking care of the needy people for this coming winter. I'd say, according to what we find, that nearly 2,500 Indians will be on relief this winter. Mr. McKay, could you give a summary of our meeting this morning with the state welfare and the county commissioners meeting that we had this morning?
The Indian Bureau, of course, as it was brought out there this morning, contributes absolutely nothing. In fact, they haven't contributed anything for general relief here since 1938, I believe, the latter years of the Depression, so to speak. And shortly after this council was elected in July, we got together with the county commissioners and agreed that that we would, that is the Blackfeet tribe would, again contribute the sum of $40,000 to be used for general assistance. Of course, we expected at that time that we would get some help from the United States government through the Bureau of Indian Affairs. That is, that they would make a cash contribution to this welfare program. But as the superintendent stated there this morning, they will not contribute anything. That's out of the question for this year. So it comes down to this, that if the Blackfeet tribe does not contribute to the welfare program for this year, there just won't be a welfare program on the Blackfeet Reservation.
When we was in Billings down there, at the area office down there, they said down there that we had over $36,000 in there. So why couldn't we get some of that out of the Class A funds?
It was brought out over there at the council meeting at the library this morning that approximately $10,000 of that is obligated, so that would actually leave us only $25,000 that we would have available for any other purpose.
And we must all realize when this $25,000 is taken out of the fund in Washington, that's the end of the money there. That leaves us a zero balance.
Mr. Chairman, I was just thinking we're selling cattle today and maybe selling cattle for a week. Why couldn't we use some of this money to make up your $40,000? Can't we use that kind of money?
Well, Mr. Spanish, as you know, we have this agreement with the Bureau on our credit and cattle setup. And the way the regulations are drawn up so forth, why it's impossible to use those funds to put into this program.
You mean, Mr. Chairman, that we can use this cattle fund for relief?
That's
we
right.
can't use that.
No, we can't, Mr. Spanish. That's right.
After the meeting, I asked Wetzel and McKay for some background on the mess they're in.
At one time, we of the Blackfeet tribe were one of the most feared and one of the most respected Indian tribes in the United States. We were able to hold and control a large area of hunting ground. At the time that the non-Indians came on the reservation and attempted to deal with us, all this vast area was ours. We controlled an area as large as the entire state of Montana.
What happened to the Blackfeet? What went wrong?
Well, the tribe in the last few years, has underwent quite a strain. There's been a lot of money spent for services, extra services, such as large expenditures going for health. The oil income has dropped. It's just been a lull in everything.
But how do you account for the unemployment? It seems to me that every other person's out of a job. Well, that's an exaggeration, but...
Well, you're right there. The employment situation is terrible in this section of the country. The railroads have cut down hiring men, and as you know, there's just certain times of the year that you can work. And I'd say that out of 5,000 Indians living on this reservation, that 2,500 of those people during the winter months are unemployed. Naturally, that's a responsibility that the tribe has to assume to take care of those needy people. Well, the Blackfeet tribe has taken a strong initiative to try to get industry on the reservation and trying to promote development of their resources. Just to give you an example, last year, early this year, we sent a delegation to the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. to try to get a missile base here on the Blackfeet Reservation. The purpose of that was to create employment for Indians in this area.
You would have given them land for it, or what?
Well, the idea was that we would give them the land lease-free.
How much land?
Well, we talked in terms of 10,000 acres of land at that time.
You would have just given them that land to get the payroll here.
Yes, that's right. In order to establish a payroll to take care of these people that are able-bodied, willing to work, but that can't get a job.
Beginning in the 1880s, the Blackfeet tribe started ceding land to the government, or started giving their land to the government. At times, of course, there were small actual cash considerations involved, but I think that from my contact with the older Indians, I've come to the conclusion that actually they were giving in an effort to get along with the non-Indians. That the Indians on the reservation at the time realized that the time would come when the non-Indians would live amongst them, and they felt that by giving them lands on which to build their homes on and so on, that a definite example of coexistence could be set here on the reservation and in this area. But then, after the beginning of the 1900s, I think in 1908, on this reservation, the so-called allotment system began. That is, the reservation was entirely divided up into individual land allotments. Each individual was given a per capita share in the ownership of the reservation. Well, that was something that was entirely new to Indians. They didn't, that was something they didn't comprehend. They didn't understand that land could be owned and could be traded, could be sold, could be put up as collateral and the like. When a person stops to think about that, that's only been 51 years ago that this land concept came into being. Well, I think that then is when, in my estimation, the government adopted its policy of what I call as a policy of inaction, which has been entirely, as far as this reservation is concerned, has been entirely effective in encouraging Indians to dispose of their land. Indians aren't able to get loans to develop their property. They aren't able to get credit. We are unable to give them the help they need with our own income. The only collateral they have is their land. So then, in order to live, in order to get a existence, they have to dispose of their land to get some immediate cash to live on.
Now, what these old-timers say, it's all true. Everything what they say. They have to sell their lands to get along. They're hard up. I have to sell land. I got sick to pay my debt, doctor bill, and get something to eat. I have to do it. No other income.
Do you have anything but your land? Do you own anything else?
No, just land.
And so the Indian is being separated from his only asset, his land. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, when it has the option, almost invariably rules against him. The tribes have been obliged to assume more and more financial burdens, such as relief and health. Reservations have been deprived of water rights. Indians have had more and more difficulty getting loans. Hardship land sales have been permitted or encouraged that chop up the Indian holdings in ways that make it difficult for the Indians to survive on the lands they have left. Whenever possible, their lands are made subject to taxes. And when the Indians want actual possession of money or land that is rightfully theirs, but which Congress must vote to let them have, Congress is prevailed upon to agree only if the Indians agree to termination, agree to the repudiation of the Indian treaties. Considerable progress has been made recently in educating the Indians and in giving them wider experience in handling their own affairs, but they still are, for the most part, unprepared for the hurly-burly of our competitive society. Their general health is bad, they are childishly susceptible to flashy con men, and they are still hamstrung by anti-Indian discrimination as strong in some places as any discrimination against Southern Negroes. So whether by design or remarkable coincidence, the Indians are being subjected to a wide variety of influences tending to drive them off their lands. These priceless lands, priceless to all Americans, in many cases would be opened up to ruinous exploitation. Interior Secretary Seaton said during the last campaign that there would be no forced termination. The Indian Bureau told me this is not a change of policy. Seaton was campaigning at the time for Republican Senator Goldwater in Arizona. Goldwater is now safely reelected, and whether Seaton's declaration represented a change in approach or not, we should soon see whether the gentle policy he announced will be carried out, or whether the heckling, the threatening, the economic bullying of the Indian will continue. Father Byrne read to me from something he wrote more than 20 years ago.
We maintain that there is no conflict between the Indian's ancestral heritage of a peculiar art and culture and his Christian faith. On the contrary, faith elevates and enables and ennobles his culture. Christ did not come to make the Gentile a Jew, the Roman a Greek. Christ was concerned with only eternal verities, of which the true, the beautiful, and the good in every nation, tribe, and people are but the manifold expression of these verities. We maintain that the Indian's culture and art are eminently true, beautiful, and good. We also maintain that the Indian's advancement according to the tempo of our times should not be thwarted. And everything, modern education, modern facilities, should be offered him as far and as rapidly as circumstances permit. We only ask that as he does go forward, he does not cast behind him as an antiquated encumbrance the priceless heirloom of his culture and art. Now, if termination were the objective, that would be destroyed.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, and with indivisible, with liberty and just for all.
In the 39th Psalm, you will find these words. For I am a stranger with thee, and a sojourner, as all my fathers were. O spare me a little, that I may recover my strength. This has been the story of the American Indian, the American stranger, the story a reporter got. The reporter, Robert McCormick of NBC News. 2 weeks from today, NBC Kaleidoscope will bring you the first of its entertainment series, and its title, Radio City Music Hall, showplace of the nation. You'll see the tremendous stage show from the world's largest indoor theater. Watch the famous precision of the Rockettes, meet them personally off stage, enjoy the 60-piece symphony orchestra, the corps de ballet, the twin console grand organ, all directly from the theater. In addition, you and I are going behind the scenes to see who picks the movies, watch the magic and the fantasy as it's being created. So 2 weeks from today, I'll be waiting for you in the grand foyer of the Radio City Music Hall. And as I've warned you before, watch us carefully, or you'll be left behind. Good afternoon.
Next week at this time, see The So-Called Human Race, an original comedy starring Menashe Skolnick, written especially for Omnibus. Now stay tuned for Meet the Press over most of these NBC stations.